32 minutes after 11 is the time. This is the clip. Keep this in mind when you hear him later claim full responsibility for his failings, claim to be humbled by the whole experience, claim that he'd learned his lesson, claim that he commissioned the report to set the record straight and allow us all to move on. This, I think, is the clip that pulls his pants down in the most humiliating fashion.
Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman probably missed what I said at the beginning, but I apologise. I apologise for the impression that has been given that staff in Downing Street take this less than seriously. I'm sickened myself and furious about that.
He didn't even apologise for what had happened, did he, then? Because that would have involved an acknowledgement. He apologised for the impression that staff in Downing Street didn't take things seriously, while he was already a regular attendee at Wine Time Fridays. Theo Ushwood is here. Now, Theo Ushwood, as you may have noticed over the years together on this programme, it can be of a rather excitable disposition on occasions. But I have to tell you, when push really comes to shove, the man is a machine. His laser-like focus is like nothing you have ever seen. He is positive. He's like Garry Kasparov playing chess, except in front of him is not a chessboard. In front of him is a collection of photographs. Theo, talk to me.
I've laid them all out. So we've got photographs from the 13th of November 2020, which is, of course, the Lee Cain leaving drinks. And then we've also got photographs from the 19th of June 2020, which is the Prime Minister's birthday party. In the photographs from the 13th of November, which bear striking resemblance, of course, to the one that ITV News revealed earlier in the week, you can see bottles of wine laid out on the table. There are some there's a ministerial red box belonging to the Prime Minister sat on a chair, and he's seen grinning with what looks to be a plastic cup filled with wine. And of course, those around the Prime Minister are blurred out, their identities blurred out. That was always the commitment from Number 10, not to reveal their identities. Moving on to the June the 2020 party, actually going back in time, is a picture of the cabinet room, and in it there are jugs of orange juice laid out, packets of sandwiches. And then there's also, from looking at the pictures, I'm just trying to see, there's some wine as well, I think. And then this is in the cabinet room. Simon Case, the cabinet secretary, is pictured. Other people attending, they have their faces blurred out. And then Simon Case looking at Boris Johnson as he holds up what looks like a can of drink, and then he has some food in his hand, and then there's a large television screen at the end of the room with both men looking at it. I don't know whether it's clear that somebody has dialed in. I've got the conclusions of the report.
Yeah.
Gone to the very end of it, and this is I've just put a pen over the most. Perhaps the most damning, Sue Gray saying in her second conclusion, it's also clear from the outcome of the police investigation that a large number of individuals, 83, who attended these events breached COVID regulations and therefore COVID guidance. She says, I've already commented in my update on what I found to be the failures of leadership and judgment in Number 10 and the Cabinet Office. The events that I investigated were attended by leaders in government. Many of these events should not have been allowed to happen. It is also the case that some of the more junior civil servants believed that their involvement in some of these events was permitted given the attendance of senior leaders. The senior leadership at the centre, both political and official, that's a reference, of course, to Boris Johnson, the political, Simon Case, the official, must bear responsibility for this culture. And then I just jump to conclusion number 5, and she concludes, I found that some staff had witnessed or been subjected to behaviours at work which they had felt concerned about, but at times felt unable to raise properly. I was made aware of multiple examples of a lack of respect and poor treatment of security and cleaning staff. This was unacceptable. I am reassured to see that steps have since been taken to introduce more easily accessible means by which to raise concerns electronically, in person or online, including directly with the Permanent Secretary in Number 10. I hope that this will truly embed a culture that welcomes and creates opportunities for challenge and speaking up at all levels. And the reason that I've highlighted that, James, is that the Prime Minister repeatedly came to the comments and he said, I have been given assurances that all the rules and the guidance was followed. But people were trying to blow the whistle on this stuff, going by that conclusion from Sue Gray. They were trying to say that they were uncomfortable about what was happening, and they didn't feel unable to make their voices heard. So that's move. And then finally, I'm just saying.
What do you mean finally? It's 37 pages.
37 pages. Sorry. Conclusion number 7.
Carry on.
The matter of what disciplinary action should now take place is outside of the scope of this report and is for others to consider. Nothing set out in this report can be taken as constituting a disciplinary investigation or findings of fact appropriate for such a purpose. However, I do offer a reflection. While there is no excuse for some of the behaviour set out here, it is important to acknowledge that those in the most junior positions attended gathering at which their seniors were present or indeed organised.
Theo Usherwood, a first glimpse, if you like, at the Sue Gray report. And of course, as we've observed many times, the bigger the gap between the first revelations and the first shock of discovery that Downing Street was partying like it was 1999 while the rest of us were attending funerals over Zoom, the longer it goes on, the more it dissipates. So there isn't anything in there that wasn't really already in the outside, except, as you've pointed out, perhaps the suggestion that staff were trying to blow the whistle while Boris Johnson was standing up in the House of Commons claiming that everyone was obeying the rules and that he was trying
There are some emails, James, which I'll try and fill it while
you have
Andrew's
a little,
speaking.
There's no rush, because I'm delighted to say my newish LBC colleague Andrew Marr is on the line, on the screen even, limbering
newish
up.
But very elderly.
Well, if I may, Andrew Marr, I will draw upon the vintage that you just referred to and ask you to put today's events and, of course, the broader scandal into some sort of context or perspective with relation to other issues of political misconduct that you've covered over the years.
Well, I've followed a lot of sexual and financial scandals in politics for 40 years. I've seen ministerial resignations, and I have smelt the stench of the death of governments, the fall of Margaret Thatcher, the end of the Blair government, the fall of Gordon Brown, and many, many more, the great dramas during the Maastricht debate under John Major. There has never been anything remotely like this. In other words, egregious, stinking behaviour at the heart of government when the rest of the country was trying to do the right thing. I think the most important, I was very, very interested in Theo's analysis, a very, very good précis and summary of what's in the report, Theo. But I think the single line that matters most is right at the beginning, finding conclusion number 2. And she says, whatever the initial intent, what took place at many of these gatherings and the way they developed was not in line with COVID guidance at the time. Boris Johnson said again and again, no rules were broken. We have it in absolute black and white from Sue Gray herself. Rules were broken again and again and again. And the culture, this business of the junior civil servants being unable to report what they felt was inappropriate. We heard yesterday about custodians who didn't like the look of these parties being mocked by people who were at the party. Yes. The culture is what I describe again as stinking.
The likelihood of anything like this unfolding under any of the other prime ministers you've just mentioned, I know this is a bit of a counterfactual, but is there something unique about Downing Street in its current iteration, or could this fraying at the edges have become endemic under any other prime minister that you've reported on? I
really can't imagine it. I mean, there's a sad bit almost, James, at the end where Sue Gray says, she sort of sticks up for the civil servants, and she says, she's still proud to be a civil servant, and she says, many are dismayed this behaviour took place, public have a right to expect much higher standards. It is my firm belief, however, that these events did not reflect the prevailing culture in government and the civil service at the time. In other words, outside Downing Street, outside Number 10, we still have an uncorrupted, well-behaving civil servants, outside the centre. Now, Margaret Thatcher ran Number 10, ran the Downing Street machine with a rod of iron. She had very high standards. Everybody worked extremely hard. There was certainly no kind of drunkenness. Same thing, I would say, in a very different way with, Tony Blair. He had this sofa government, it was described, a bit too informal, call me Tony, and all the rest of it. But these were very, very hard-working, serious people doing their utmost. No, in answer to your question, I can't understand this. I can't believe this would have happened under any other regime that I've ever lived through.
There's a sort of sense of contagion, isn't there? What?
Yeah.
I mean, 12:30 for the statement. PMQs will be interesting. I'll put you on the spot, actually. If you were Keir Starmer, what question would you ask at PMQs in 20 minutes' time?
I would ask him, Prime Minister, when you told the House of Commons, and then give a series of dates, that no rules were broken, were you deliberately misleading us? Because we have this weird thing in our constitution that in the end, the only thing people have to resign for is deliberately misleading Parliament. And I think this goes to the Privileges Committee, which is going to be quite tough for him, I think. And I think that is the single lethal line of attack.
Well, the Privileges Committee, I don't think starts for a fortnight, does it? I mean, so
it'll start shortly after June the 6th.
So we still, I mean, there's more delay, more kicking of cans. So today will not signal the end of the saga, regardless of what transpires in the Commons later today. If you could just talk us through briefly the choreography of what happens next, Andrew.
So we have Prime Minister's questions, which will be the theatrical confrontation where Keir Starmer is under huge pressure to land a serious blow. He hasn't had long to read this report, but frankly, he and his team have had enough time. They'll have gone to conclusions, they'll have looked at the photographs, and he will be prepared for that. That'll be probably the big dramatic moment. But after that, there will be a statement by the Prime Minister to the House of Commons giving his explanation of the whole thing. He may try and push the questions off during PMQs until that moment.
Right.
But I know of Tory MPs who are determined to go in and ask some very hard questions at that moment. Then he goes and he does a press conference where, among other people, I hope to be asking a question myself. And no, I'm not going to tell you yet what it is because I haven't thought of it yet, just before you start.
Fair enough.
And then later on he goes to the 1922 committee, that's all the Tory MPs, meeting behind closed doors. And if you remember last time, there was a sense that there was an air of triumphalism and that the previous apologies made in public weren't quite repeated there. And some Tory MPs are very upset about that. I think it's going to be large slices of humble pie all day with a side order of grovel sauce. And that will happen then. And then we'll see what happens later in the day. Then there's the Tonight with Andrew Marr on LBC at 6 o'clock.
You preempted.
That's the concluding and most important part of the day, obviously.
Yes, you did. And is it too early to give us a flavour? I mean, obviously we know what you will be talking about. Do we know to whom you will be talking about it?
Well, I'm very much hoping that one of Mr. Johnson's critics, the MP Tobias Ellwood, will join us. He said he's going to do his very best. He's going to be in the chamber, so he'll have to duck out.
Of course. and
we will probably have a cabinet. Well, we will certainly have a cabinet minister, but. Of course, the question then is, can any cabinet minister add anything really to what Johnson himself has said in the House of Commons?
Only one way to find out. Tune in to Andrew Marr at 6 o'clock this evening on LBC.
Good man. Good man.
I've done this before, you know.
James.
Thank you, Andrew. Take care. And indeed, welcome aboard. I've said it off air, but I haven't said it on air.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
Cheers. 11:45 is the time. It is 10 to 12, give or take, and we will cross live, of course, to Downing Street to the House of Commons even, I think we'll do it differently today. Should we do it when the Prime Minister gets to his feet, just so that we don't miss anything? It may mean that we endure a slightly dull moment or two before Keir Starmer gets to his feet to start asking questions. Little heads up there from Andrew Marr, I felt, on the possibility of Johnson trying to avoid any of Keir Starmer's questions by saying, I am going to make an announcement later. I will be making a statement on this subject at 12:30. I don't know whether that would work as a gambit for Boris Johnson, but important to note the possibility that it may occur. And an awful lot of love for Andrew Marr's turn of phrase. Humble pie with a side of grovel sauce is going to be on the Boris Johnson menu for the rest of today. Theo, of course, is still with us, and still, I mean, leafing through these 37 pages in search of the choicest morsels. What have you snaffled out?
I've just got to page 9. The party, the 20th of May 2020, gathering in the garden of Number 10, and this was the Bring Your Own Booze email from the Principal Private Secretary Martin Reynolds at the time. And it actually turns out, Sue Gray's uncovered that preparations didn't start with that email. Preparations for this party actually began in an email sent on the 13th of May by an unnamed Number 10 official saying, Hi all, it's meant to be nice weather next week, so shall we try and do socially distanced drinks in the garden on Wednesday or Thursday? We can open it up to anyone else who is in the house on that day. What's particularly interesting, though, about this event is that actually Lee Kane, who was the Number 10 Director of Communications, wrote a response to Martin Reynolds' email on the 20th of May saying, I'm sure it will be fine, and I applaud the gesture, but a 200-odd person invitation for drinks in the garden of number 10 is somewhat of a comms risk in the current environment. Lee Kane says he subsequently, and I'm quoting from the report here, spoke to Martin Reynolds and advised him that the event should be cancelled. Martin Reynolds does not recall any such conversation. In addition, Dominic Cummings has also said that he too raised concerns in writing. We have not found any documentary evidence of this. And you'll just remember...
Just hang on, just for people who aren't as au fait with the rubric as you are, Martin Reynolds has recently...
Principal Private Secretary. He's the one, he's going for the...
He's been recently touted as an ambassador to Saudi Arabia,
Yes.
which is seen as a fairly plum appointment. Lee Kane is in the wilderness.
No, he's working in the private sector.
But he's not still
He's
looking
not,
for a
no.
knighthood. So the fellow who says he raised it, on the record, no longer under the Boris Johnson umbrella, the fellow who says, well, I have no memory of that whatsoever, about to become an ambassador.
Yes, there's another interesting line in points 27 and points 28. Now, number
They're
10
my favourites. Carry on.
So in point 27 and 28, now Sue Gray turns to this idea that's been put out by number 10 and those who support, and I'm sure we're going to hear it today from Conservative MPs backing Boris Johnson, that number 10's a special building. It's also the Prime Minister's home. You've got people working very long hours. There's a lot of stress, and that actually people need to be able to unwind.
Absolute cobblers. I mean, you're right, we will hear that, but it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We were speaking to a fella in a fire station earlier. He'd have loved to bring a six-pack back after a tough call once they were off duty.
So, in particular, number 10 Downing Street and the Cabinet Office were at the centre of the government's response to the pandemic. Sue Gray says tight-knit groups of officials and advisors worked long hours and difficult conditions. However, she goes on to say in point 28, those challenges also applied to key and frontline workers across the country who were working under equally, if not more demanding conditions.
Yes, exactly that. Just read that last bit again.
Those challenges, however,
Yes.
also applied to key and frontline workers across the country who were all working under equally, if not more, demanding conditions.
That's an interesting...
Oh, no, I didn't finish it then. Often at risk to their own health. It is important to remember the stringency of the public health regulations in force in England over the relevant periods, and that criminal sanctions were applied to many of those found to be in breach of them. The hardship under which citizens across the country worked, lived and sadly even died while observing the government's regulations and guidance rigorously are known only too well.
There it is. And not for the first time, events actually following where our callers have already led. Philip in Greenwich pointing out that as a firefighter, the idea that they were doing more important or more stressful work was somewhat hard to swallow, but the idea that they'd be able to do it with a skinful of alcohol inside them was patently ridiculous. Can I pick a bit? I've got some as well. Sure. This is a good one. This is a party on June the 18th, 2020. That was the first lockdown and in many ways the hardest. This is a description of one party. There was excessive alcohol consumption by some individuals, one of whom was sick. You've actually got chundering going on now in Downing Street during lockdown. There was a minor altercation between two other individuals, chundering and fighting during the first lockdown at Downing Street. And finally, the last member of staff who stayed to tidy up left at 1 a.m? No. 2 a.m? No. 3 a.m? No. 13 minutes after 3 in the morning. That's a work gathering, remember? If you're minded today to be tugging your forelock and doffing your cap, if you're limbering up for a little bit of sycophantic defence of the big dog, that's a work gathering, yeah? The one that the person left to tidy up only got out of the building at 3:15 in the morning. We've all been to leaving dues like that in the middle of a lockdown, haven't we? So if you are limbering up to sell what's left of your soul today in defence of a man who deserves absolutely no support whatsoever, you've got to remember that a fight, a chunder, and a 3:15 in the morning finish, all perfectly normal for a work gathering. Theo, anything else?
No, I'll keep.
What am I going to do? I'm live on the radio.
I'm reading, James. I'm reading.
Okay. Well, we will bring you any further choice morsels from this. One individual was sick. There was a minor altercation between two individuals. David Allen Green, one of my favourite commentators on the legal side of things, has tweeted rather cryptically, having scanned the conclusions, it feels like watching Aston Villa go 2-up against Manchester City with 20 minutes to go. What happens in the next 20 minutes Of course, we are about to find out, beginning with PMQs, which should kick off in the next 2 or 3 minutes. Theo's got his hand in the air.
Yes, so just bringing you up to date with the 16th of April 2021, which was the James Slack leaving do.
Just remind us where James Slack is now.
He works at the Sun newspaper.
And how comprehensive has the Sun's coverage of these parties been, or how comprehensive was it in the early days of so-called Partygate?
So I think if you were reading in the early days of the Partygate scandal, you might have been, and you wanted every detail, James,
Yes.
you might be turning to the Daily Mirror on your newsagent shelf.
Right, or the Times, actually, or possibly this radio programme. But the fellow you mentioned, James Slack, is now deputy editor of The Sun,
Editor-in-chief.
hired by Boris Johnson from political editor of the Daily Mail.
They're hired by Theresa May.
So Theresa May, having been political
as
editor of the Daily Mail, stayed in post. And then, crucially, of course, was he at this? Because the Sun also had a massive party that was almost certainly in breach of the law. But don't worry, everybody, because they investigated it themselves. The Sun newspaper investigated the party themselves, at which at least 2 couples were reportedly caught in flagrante delicto. And they investigated themselves, and all the appropriate actions were taken. So, say what you like about the man. He surrounds himself with stand-up guys. What have you found?
So this was a party that James Slack had for his leaving do on the 16th. It also rolled into the digital team's party. The report says that...
So we're now describing a scenario in which there were so many parties that they sometimes blended into each other. There used to be a club in Manchester called DeVille's, and they would have quite hardcore techno in one room and happy house in the other room, and occasionally you'd get caught in a corridor in between, and you'd have the bass line coming from one room and the piano chords coming from the other room, and you've got this remarkable hybrid of music, and that's what happened here. 2 parties unfolding separately ended up merging.
Yes, so wine and beer had been bought by staff and was consumed by some during the speeches. Following the speeches, some staff returned to work, but others continued chatting and drinking. They remained for some time and were present in the building, was being locked down for the evening. Those still present were asked to leave the building by a number 10 custodian. The group then moved into the number 10 garden.
Wow.
There was mingling between the 2 events, with some staff moving up and down the stairs in between the basement and the press office. The 2 groups eventually joined together in the garden. Shortly before 9:30, there were 20 people present in the garden with a number of bottles of alcohol. A number of individuals gathered near a child's swing slide in the garden, damaging it by leaning on it and playing with it. This was noticed the next morning. At this time, the custodian staff at number 10 continued to lock down the building. They noted the groups of individuals had gone into the garden. The group began to break up and return to the main building at 9:30. The number 10 entry log showed that a number of people left number 10 at this point. So they're leaving at 9:30, having arrived at 6. They were encouraged by a custodian to use the rear exit of number 10.
So that's chucking out time.
Yeah.
That's like ding, 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 last orders, please, gentlemen. Time, gentlemen, please. Time, gentlemen, please. This is happening in Downing Street during lockdown.
Yes, so some individuals remained in the building and carried on drinking alcohol into the early hours.
I believe that's called a lock-in. So they had a lock-in. They had a lock-in at Downing Street during the lockdown. A lock-in during lockdown. There's your headline, if there was a newspaper in the country with the guts to write it.
So exit logs show that some left after midnight and others between 01:45 and 02:45. Two members of staff stayed later.
And this
with
is,
one
of course, we
leaving
need to remind ourselves, this is Boris Johnson's house. So if he was, minded on even a matter of principle to object to it, he's only got to go downstairs in his wee willy winky nightshirt and hat. And of course, here we go. Here he is. Let's go. So we're not going across. My apologies. Apparently there was cheering in the chamber.
I was just going to say the last person on that party, Prince Philip's party, left at 20 minutes past 4 in the morning.
That's not Prince Philip's party. The party on the night before Prince Philip. Say that time again, would you?
It was 4:20 in the morning. Let me just check that.
20 past 4 in the morning.
Yeah, 4:20.
I'm so old, Theo. When's the last time you were burning the midnight oil?
One person left at 11 minutes past 3 in the morning.
11 minutes past 3 in the morning. That's the exit log, so Sue Gray would have had access to that. And so, of course, could Boris Johnson if he was minded to. A few people suggesting that hashtag Chundergate needs to be... But I disagree, actually. I try to inject a little bit of levity. I'm sure most of it falls flat by the time it comes out of your radio. But this is really, really, really serious stuff, especially when you think back to some of the calls that we took half an hour ago from people who were enjoying the worst sort of privations and experiences by dint of actually doing their best to follow the rules and follow the guidance and follow the regulations, the guidance that Matt Hancock resigned after breaching, the sort of spirit of the situation that Allegra Stratton resigned after breaching, all while Boris Johnson was claiming that nothing had gone wrong, all guidance had been observed, and that there was absolutely no case to answer. So I've said it before and I'll say it again. Here is the line you need to remember. He wasn't sorry when you didn't know, and he's only sorry that you do. And the man of whom I speak, Boris Johnson, is poised to get to his feet in the House of Commons to open proceedings for today's PMQ.
Just said about the reports of the fatal shooting in a Texan primary school. Our thoughts are with all those affected by this horrific attack. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I welcomed the Emir of Qatar to Downing Street. It's excellent news that Qatar announced it will invest up to £10 billion into the UK through our new strategic investment partnership. And not only will it boost local economies and support jobs, it will support our green economy and decarbonisation. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Anthony Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cambridge is one of the most expensive places to live in the country, but unlike many cheaper places, NHS workers in the city get no high cost of living supplement. So NHS workers in Cambridge pay higher rents than NHS workers in outer London boroughs like Redbridge and Croydon and Bexley and Barking, and yet they get paid 15% less. This makes it very difficult for the NHS in Cambridge, including Addenbrooke's Hospital, to retain and recruit staff. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, work with me to make sure that NHS workers in South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge get paid fairly?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is a fantastic champion for his constituents and for Addenbrooke's, and we're very proud of our NHS, and that's why we're putting record investment in, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that the independent NHS pay review body will listen carefully to what my honourable friend has just said.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my thoughts also, and I know the thoughts of the whole House, are with the families of the victims of yesterday's school shooting in Texas. 19 children have died, some as young as 7, and 2 adults believed to be teachers. It is an unspeakable tragedy, and our hearts are with the American people. Last weekend marked the anniversary of both the Manchester bombing and the murder of Lee Rigby, and we remember them this year as we do every year. And today is also the anniversary of the killing of George Floyd, a reminder that we must all tackle the racism that is still experienced by so many in our country and beyond. Mr. Speaker, the Sue Gray report was published this morning, and I look forward to discussing that during this afternoon's statement with the Prime Minister. For now, I want to focus on the cost of living affecting the whole country. Mr. Speaker, since we stood here last week and I asked the Prime Minister yet again to back Labour's plans for a windfall tax to reduce energy bills, hundreds of millions of pounds have been added to bills of families across the country, and hundreds of millions of pounds have landed in the bank accounts of energy companies. It sounds like he's finally seen sense, and the inevitable U-turn may finally have arrived. So when can people across the country expect him to use those oil and gas profits to bring down their bills?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's nothing original about a Labour plan to tax business. There's nothing remarkable. They want to tax business the whole time, every day. Labour wants to put up taxes on business. And what we're doing is we're helping people. He asks when we're going to help people. We're helping people now, Mr. Speaker. And we're putting £22 billion into people's pockets already, cutting council tax by £150, cutting fuel duty, cutting national insurance contributions by an average of £330 for people who pay NICs. And Mr. Speaker, how can we afford that? Because we have a strong economy, because we came out of COVID fast, Mr. Speaker, which would not have been possible if we'd listened to the party opposite.
15 tax rises, and he pretends they're a low-tax government. It's been, Mr. Speaker, it's been 4.5 months since Labour first called for a windfall tax on oil and gas profits. I've raised it week in, week out, and every week he has a new reason for not doing it. The Business Secretary said it's bad. The Justice Secretary called it disastrous. Even this weekend, the Health Secretary and the Northern Ireland Secretary opposed it. He ordered all of his MPs to vote against it last week. And now, surprise, surprise, he's backing it. Prime Minister, I'm told that hindsight is a wonderful thing. But Mr. Speaker, whilst he dithered and delayed, households across the country suffered when they didn't need to. What?
Peter. Mr. Bone, a man who always wants to catch my eye is not going the best way to do so. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, whilst he dithered and delayed, households across the country suffered when they didn't need to. What is it about the Sue Gray report that first attracted him to a U-turn this week?
Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, there is no surprise about Labour's lust. There's no surprise about Labour's lust to put up taxes. There's nothing original about his thought. They get off on it. They absolutely love to confiscate other people's assets. What we prefer to do, Mr. Speaker, is make sure that we have the measures that are in place to drive investment in our country and drive jobs. And it's thanks to the steps that we took, thanks to the fact that we came out of COVID faster than any other European country, which would not have been possible if we'd listened to him, that we now have unemployment at the listen to this. They used to care about this, Mr. Speaker. Unemployment at the lowest level since 1974. And, put that in your pipe.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I actually thought with this U-turn he might actually get his head out of the sand, but obviously not. The reality is that every day of his dithering and his delay, £53 million has been added to Britain's household bills. Whilst he's distracted trying to save his own job, the country has been counting the cost. But complacency is nothing new for this government. Back in October, the Chancellor delivered a mini-budget that has to be reread to be believed. With inflation already climbing, he said that he understood people were concerned about it and the government was ready to act. Since then, inflation has risen to a 40-year high, the highest rate of any G7 country. If the government was so ready to act 6 months ago, why hasn't it?
Mr. Speaker, the government has acted, and my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, continues to act. This is the government that we not only put in the living wage, Mr. Speaker, it was a Conservative institution, but we've now raised it by a record amount. We've raised it by £1,000, Mr. Speaker, a record amount. We've helped families on universal credit have another £1,000, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the measures, the £9.1 billion we've already put in to support people's costs of heating. We're abating the costs of fuel for people up and down the country. And of course, we're going to do more, Mr. Speaker. We're going to put our arms around the people of this country, just as we did throughout the COVID pandemic. But the reason we can do that is because we took the tough decisions to drive the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, which wouldn't have been possible if you listened to him, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we have, let me take another statistic, youth unemployment. They used to care about it. Youth unemployment at or near a record low.
Mr. Speaker, it wasn't just the Chancellor back in September. The Prime Minister called fears about inflation unfounded. He was the last person to spot the cost of living crisis, just as he's the last person to back Labour's plan to help people through it. And Mr. Speaker, it wasn't just on inflation that they got it badly wrong. In the same speech, the Chancellor boasted about growth. Prime Minister does today. How we were going to do better than all our major competitors. It was obvious that he was being complacent. And lo and behold, Britain is set to have the lowest growth of any major country except Russia. Despite our brilliant businesses and all we have to offer, why has his government inflicted on Britain the twin-headed hydra of the highest inflation and the lowest growth?
Mr. Speaker, he loves running this country down. How many times did he come to this place? How many times did he come to this place and say that the United Kingdom had the highest COVID death rate in Europe? How many times? He was proved completely wrong. Did he ever apologise, Mr. Speaker? Absolutely not. Did he ever take it back? Absolutely not, Mr. Speaker. Actually, because of the steps we took, last year we had the fastest growth in the G7, and we will return to the fastest growth by 2024, 2025, thanks to the decisions that this government took, Mr. Speaker. And they don't care about getting people into jobs. They don't care. We care about the working people of this country, making sure we have a high wage, high skill, high employment economy. And that's what we're delivering.
He talks about running this country down. He is running this country down. And it wasn't just complacency on Labour's windfall tax, which he's now backing. It wasn't just complacency on inflation, which is now through the roof. And it wasn't just complacency on growth, which is now spluttering along at the back of the pack. Because his Chancellor also claimed that people should keep more of the rewards of their efforts. And then he put their taxes up. So does the Prime Minister want to explain to hard-working people whose wages are running out sooner and sooner each month and who are facing astronomical bills and prices just how his 15 tax rises since taking office have helped them to keep more of their rewards in their pocket?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, what we're doing is making sure, after a huge pandemic, that we are funding our vital public services, which we can, because of the steps that we take. What we're also doing is making sure that we put more money back into people's pockets by the measures that I've outlined today, whether through cutting national insurance contributions or lifting the living wage or lifting universal credit, Mr. Speaker. But all this is made possible. Because we took the responsible and sensible steps to protect our economy throughout COVID and then to come out strongly. And he's completely wrong about this country's growth performance, Mr. Speaker. He runs it down. He was proved wrong about COVID. He's going to be proved wrong again.
Just delusional. Mr. Speaker, last week I raised the case of Phoenix Halliwell, whose kidney condition means he needs daily dialysis and whose energy bill has gone through the roof as a result. I'm glad that as a result government officials got in touch with Phoenix yesterday, and I hope that will result in more support for people who are vulnerable. But it shouldn't be left to Labour to turn up week after week to make him aware of the consequences of his dither and delay. So I want to raise another issue where the government is sleepwalking into disaster. With the summer holidays looming, there are reports that the Home Office already has a backlog of 500,000 passports to issue. That's potentially more than 500,000 people worrying whether they will get away this summer. So can the Prime Minister reassure people that they won't miss out on their holidays due to the failures of his Home Office?
Well, I thank you very much, but I can tell him actually that what we're doing is massively increasing the speed with which the Passport Office deliver, and to the best of my knowledge, everybody is getting their passport within 4 to 6 weeks, Mr. Speaker. But that is because we are driving the leadership of this country, and we are getting things done that would never have been possible if we'd listened to them. We got Brexit done, Mr. Speaker, when he voted 48 times. 48 times he voted to undo the will of the people. We got the vaccine rollout done when he would have kept us in the European Medicines Agency, Mr. Speaker. We were the first European country to help the Ukrainians resist Vladimir Putin. Yes. Do you think anybody seriously believe for a second that they would have done it?
Some are trying to boo, some are trying to cheer. The worst of it is I can't hear the Prime Minister. Come on, Prime Minister.
Let me say very plainly, does anybody seriously think for a second that the Labour Party would have done that, Mr. Speaker, when eight of the shadow front bench, including the shadow Foreign Secretary, who is mysteriously not in his place, voted recently to get rid of this country's independent nuclear deterrent? And he campaigned to put Jeremy Corbyn in Downing Street, Mr. Speaker. We get on, we do the difficult things. We take the tough decisions, Mr. Speaker. Social care, we're fixing it. They deliver.
Prime Minister, we both can't be on our feet. I'm trying to help you. You've got to help me as well. And I'm sure you've got to the end because Mr. Stewart's itching to get his question. Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Prime Minister gets passionate, things get done. Brexit is done. If they could contain themselves, the vaccine rollout done. So will my right honourable friend personally intervene so that the immunocompromised, like my constituent Scott, can get access to British wonder drug Eversheld, and then they, not next winter, not next year, but now, so that they can enjoy this summer and enjoy their freedom just like the rest of us.
Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I know that my honourable friend has taken a keen interest in this for a while. Eversheld could potentially reduce the risk of infection, as he says. We've got to look at the available evidence before we can make a decision.
We'll stay with this for a while. There may be some Conservative MPs who ask some difficult questions. It was suggested earlier that might happen, and then we'll pull out as usual otherwise. After Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join others today to express my deepest sorrow at the horrific events in Texas yesterday. 19 children and 2 teachers have needlessly lost their lives. Many of us in Scotland will be remembering the tragic events that took place in Dunblane 26 years ago. The thoughts and prayers of the SNP are with the families suffering today, but also our hope that lawmakers will finally act to bring the scourge of gun violence that plagues the United States to an end. Mr. Speaker, the reports that the Prime Minister and Downing Street's law-breaking have been damning. Empty bottles littering offices, rooms so crowded people were sitting on each other's laps, and security forced to intervene because the parties were so outrageous. At the centre was the Prime Minister orchestrating it, grabbing a glass for himself in order to toast the partygoers. For 8 months, we've heard every excuse under the sun. But now we've all seen the damning photo evidence. Well, people stayed at home to protect the NHS. The Prime Minister was engaging in drinking and debauchery that makes a mockery of the gut-wrenching sacrifices that each and every person made. Will the Prime Minister now take the opportunity and resign?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the right honourable gentleman that much as I appreciate his advice, he'll have a further opportunity, which I'm sure he will take with his customary length to debate that matter in the course of the statement which will follow directly after PMQs.
I'm not happy. Ian Blackford.
Matters, Mr. Speaker, but it's all a joke to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has lost the trust of the public. He has lost what little moral authority he had left. The Prime Minister has apologised many times, not because he feels any genuine remorse. He still refuses to even admit that there were parties and that he presided over them. He apologised for one simple reason. he got caught. The reality is, no apology will ever be enough for the families of people who lost loved ones, for the families who followed the rules, who stayed at home whilst their nearest and dearest to them were dying, and are now forced to look at photographs of the Prime Minister surrounded by drink, toasting to a party in the middle of a lockdown. If the Prime Minister will not accept that he must resign, then the Tory benches must act. This Prime Minister, who has broken the law and shown a cavalier attitude to the truth, cannot be allowed to remain in office. Prime Minister, time is up. Resign. Resign. Resign before this House is forced to remove him.
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and I would just direct him again. I think it would be to his advantage to look through the report, and then I think we should return to it after PMQs.
We now come to Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. High streets and heritage means a lot to the people of Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork. Bursam and Tunstall, two of the great 6 towns of Stoke-on-Trent, are plagued with rogue and absent landlords who are too happy to let shops sit empty and historically important buildings such as Price and Kensington Teapot Works fall into ruin, which is why I introduced my proper maintenance of land bill to increase fines on these ruinous owners. Can my right honourable friend confirm that as part of the government's planning reform, he will adopt my bill which imposes a new unlimited fine so these reckless reprobates can be held
22 minutes after 12 is the time. I think we can all live without hearing what Jonathan Gillis has to say about anything, can't we? Fairly confident on that. So we'll take a quick break. I know I'm not supposed to say that. Keith gets cross. We'll take a little intermission now. And Theo Usherwood will be serving Kiora orange juice and sweet and salted popcorn in the foyer. It's 25 minutes after 12 on Wednesday, May the 25th, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, although not much of me, to be honest, because PMQs is just winding down, after which we fully expect the Prime Minister's statement on the Sue Gray report into the almost countless parties thrown in Downing Street during lockdown when the rest of the country was abiding by the rules drawn up in Downing Street just prior to lockdown, rules that included you not being allowed to attend funerals or parties of any kind, or even perhaps the birth of your own baby, I think, in some cases. I've heard stories about that. So we'll take that live, which means there'll be no news bulletin at 12:30. And then there will be questions after that. So I imagine we'll stay live until Sheila Fogarty is in the building, and then she will pick up after the conclusion of that session in Parliament and invite your thoughts, canvass your responses to it. Theo is still with us, LBC's political editor. Just to clear things up, the decision by if Keir Starmer had gone in with the questions about the Sue Gray report, he would have received exactly the responses that
Ian Blackford did.
Ian Blackford received, which is, hold your horses, lads, we're doing this a bit later.
Yes, and the other thing just to note is that this report came out at 11:25. Keir Starmer just doesn't write his own speeches. He does have people working with him. And so while he's asking questions on the cost of living crisis, and there's a huge amount to go on there for him, he will have a team coming up with an actual firm, decent response. They've got an extra half an hour because of PMQs to get the Prime Minister to ask more pertinent questions of the Prime Minister. And there's nothing that he can't ask in that 7 or 8 minutes that you're going to hear from him after the Prime Minister's spoken that he couldn't have asked at PMQs. So if people are wondering why didn't he go in on Partygate, he's just given himself some more time.
Yes,
and also the economy is hugely important. It keeps the narrative. It doesn't let him fall into the trap that the Tories have gone in on, saying, "Oh, you're only obsessed by parties. You don't care about what really matters to people, like the cost of living crisis." He can say, "I dedicated 6 questions to it," and went with the point. Now the Prime Minister's announcing an inevitable U-turn when it comes to the windfall tax. This was, of course, an idea first put forward by the Lib Dems and Labour a couple of months ago.
So, I'm haunted by your observation earlier that the game is really defined by the absence of anybody waiting to take up the reins from Boris Johnson,
anybody who could be
a viable candidate. But bearing that in mind, what will Conservative MPs be looking for today? Because that was a dog's dinner of a performance from Boris Johnson at PMQs. They did. There was some cheering at some points, but there were some fairly blank faces, particularly that appalling. The regular listeners to this programme will know that I hold no torch for the last leader of the Labour Party, but to call him Vladimir Corbyn, while claiming to be the politician of seriousness and heft, the one who can be relied upon to act with gravitas and profundity, calling Jeremy Corbyn Vladimir was just pathetic.
So that goes back to an earlier point that we've talked about at these moments, James, where the Prime Minister tries to raise the spectre of Jeremy Corbyn because they know that he has polled so badly, which would of course come as no surprise given that Jeremy Corbyn led the Labour Party to its heaviest defeat in 80 odd years back in 2019. So there's a tactic there in terms of what Boris Johnson is trying to do.
Well, hang on a minute. I'd never pick you up on this stuff really because it's always so solid. But that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about him saying
political. Sorry, I'm being cynical.
You campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn, or you wanted Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister, which are valid political games to play, cards to play. But to call Jeremy Corbyn Vladimir is just ridiculous and pathetic.
So there's an idea of just trying to bring the two together as a former leader of the Labour Party.
But he's not. He's trying to compare him to Vladimir Putin, isn't he?
Yes, he is. But he's trying to bring them together because he knows how toxic that is.
The last one he did was Jimmy Savile. So when his back is really against the wall, he's like a polecat, isn't he? And he'll abandon all of the rules of decorum, all of the rules of sort of parliamentary respect, and he'll behave as if he's sort of caught in the Queen Vic chucking out time on a Friday night with the landlord coming for him with a hook. So Keir Starmer, obviously, he went with, as we were expecting him to go, with the cost of living crisis and trying to again do what George Osborne and David Cameron did to Gordon Brown, own it. Yeah. And they did that. Cameron and Osborne did that so successfully with the 2008 financial crash. Actually, that was a financial crash that was caused on the other side of the world with the subprime housing. They had a lot of help from the kind of newspapers that aren't putting Boris Johnson's current travails on
the
front page.
But we talked about the deficit for 7 years solidly.
Yes, we did.
And Keir Starmer obviously doesn't want Boris Johnson to be able to simply dismiss this as what the crisis people are facing now down to the global headwinds of inflation. Boris Johnson holding back actually and revealing details of what this windfall tax, when it comes, is going to pay for. He doesn't want that ammunition to be overlooked or sullied by what is going to happen today in terms of drawing in all of the negative stuff around Partygate. They want to create some the clear water between what's happening today and then the big announcement, which we'd expect tomorrow into Friday, probably on the announcement when it comes to that windfall tax and the proceeds of that windfall tax. But what was interesting actually in Boris Johnson's response is he says there's nothing original about a Labour plan to tax business. They want to tax business the whole time. Every day Labour wants to put up taxes on business. It's worth just reminding you, James, we're now facing the highest tax burden in this country since World War II. Corporation tax as things stand, although Rishi Sunak did hint at the Mansion House last week that it might not go ahead, but is due to go up from 19 pence in the pound to 25 pence in the pound next April, if I remember that correctly. So Boris Johnson, to your earlier point, is trying to make PMQs as political as possible between Labour and the Conservatives, ensuring that his backbenchers, when they're thinking about who their enemy is, aren't looking at him and thinking, well, your leadership's not great. It's that bloke over there, Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the point would be made best by suggesting that if Keir Starmer had called Boris Johnson or Theresa May Adolf, you'd get an idea of just how inappropriate it is to call Jeremy Corbyn Vladimir, particularly at a time like this. But we are where we are. I just wonder Lindsay Hoyle could have done a bit more.
Yes, where that may well have come.
I can't believe I'm sticking up for Jeremy Corbyn. This is what Boris Johnson does to people.
Where that might have come from, and you'll remember that when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party and we had the Salisbury poisonings, Jeremy Corbyn was at the dispatch box, James,
yes,
putting forward the same lines Now, I'm not saying for one moment there was any collusion whatsoever, but he was at the dispatch box on the record putting forward the same line that the British government should, and the British intelligence services should be taking samples from that poisoning and sending it to Russia so they can test
trust
it.
Them, the people that had urine pipes in their Winter Olympic testing laboratory, so that they could actually pipe fresh, clean urine into the laboratories and pretend that it belonged to their own athletes. You're quite right. Jeremy Corbyn thought it would be a good idea to send those people the poisons used in Salisbury in order to ask whether or not they think it was all kosher.
Yes. So just there was two other bits actually. I just wanted to pick up on. Can I?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I'm watching the screen. If the Prime Minister gets to his feet, I'll cut you off in your prime.
So just 2 points we didn't get from the report, and I'm really keen that we just do the report as thoroughly as possible, because it's all going to be about the reaction very shortly, isn't it? Martin Reynolds, we seem to have got away with it. In an email, writing that, and I think particularly the point that you picked up on, and I've tweeted it if people want to have a look at it, on page 16 of the report, James, that I'd overlooked, where there is where they're looking at, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, November the 13th flat party. Sue Gray says, I was investigating the ABBA party. She didn't use the word ABBA, but it was the ABBA party in the Downing Street flat. The Metropolitan Police said they were coming along they were going to investigate. And as a result, I halted my inquiries into that particular event. And it's just worth, of course, reminding you, listening to this, anyone listening to this, number 10, the Prime Minister nor the Prime Minister's wife were ever fined for that event.
Well, that's the one that Cummings thought would do for them as well, bless his little cotton socks.
And now Sue Gray, she also says, as she concludes her investigation into that report, she did think about looking back into it. There was some question about whether she should go back and look into it. She doesn't think it would be
William
proportionate
Ragg's
to do
just
so.
gone in with his studs up, apparently, on the Prime Minister. Conservative MP giving both barrels.
Previously been. I'll try and we could try.
They
and
do
find
exist, don't they? Roger Gale, William Ragg, Tobias Ellwood.
Do they matter enough? Are there enough of them? And you've got.
I'm just saying it not for the question of will there be enough letters. I'm just reminding people listening that there are a few decent people left in the Conservative Party.
But the key number is 180. They can get those opponents, and you have to remember there are more than 100 on the government payroll within the Conservative Party, and because there's such broad patronage within the government, you would expect that most of those 100 wouldn't vote against the Prime Minister in a no confidence vote. The Prime Minister has said that he would fight a no confidence vote. And so you're looking only at about 70 or 80 Conservative backbenchers to actually side with Boris Johnson for him to get over the line in a no confidence vote. And because of the rules about the 1922 committee, he would then be safe from any vote of no confidence for another year. And then back to my earlier point, does anybody really want it at this particular time?
No, indeed. And as you say, it's a presumption even to think that it will reach that point. Here, you've got a fan here, mate. He says, I hear friction between you and Theo. I would trust him over you any day, says Alan. Well,
okay, sorry. Thank you, Alan.
So, how long do we think the statement will be?
7 minutes.
It's 7 minutes long, and then
Keir back for 7 minutes.
Right.
Then you'll probably go to some very senior backbenchers within both sides of the House. They go one Labour, then Tory, Labour, then Tory, Tory, then Labour. And then that's where you'll listen out for more people like William Ragg speaking out. And you could also listen out, I suspect as well, for those Tory MPs who will say that the Prime Minister's doing a wonderful job. And that he
they will, won't
both.
they? I mean, people who've just woken up from a coma listening to today's programme and the sort of catalogue that we've been describing would probably not believe it. How can anyone possibly stand up today and say that he's been doing a brilliant job? But he does it himself. He just stood up there, told another lie, the same lie about the European Medicines Agency and ignoring the fact that we were perfectly free to either go it alone or go as part of the overall vaccine rollout as members of the European Union. As Starmer said, delusional comments about growth, claiming that having low unemployment is an unalloyed good when, of course, we have more job vacancies than I think at any point on record. So he can do it, and they will follow. He will stand up and say the moon is made of cheese, and they'll stand up and say, yummy cheese. Bring me more.
I don't know about the cheese bit, James.
No, fair enough.
But the point is there are loyal Conservative MPs.
Aren't they?
And they will, and ultimately, there are two ways to get rid of Boris Johnson. It's either Conservative MPs move against him and try and oust him, or there is a general election, and the people of this country decide actually they don't want Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister. Those are the only two ways to get rid of him as things as things stand.
It is 12:38. A slight delay. Probably should have taken the news on the statement from Boris Johnson about his... crikey, Andy MacDonald's gone in hard on ask the Prime Minister how he sleeps at night with so much blood on his filthy, privileged hands, which is fairly strong language, but I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as calling the last leader of the Labour Party Vladimir Corbyn, which is, I mean, just pathetic is the only word I can really think of. It is 12:38 and we're waiting for that statement from the Prime Minister. I'd quite like to have heard the William Ragg thing as well. Might dig it out a little later, because these Conservative backbenchers in particular, who do somehow manage to muster up some courage of their convictions, I do think, possibly naively, I do think they're very important, because the bleakness of the horizon otherwise, imagine if every single member of the party was now complicit in the corruption. Every single member of the cabinet is, of course, and every single one who's accepted a ministerial role or a PPS type role is arguably complicit in the corruption, but thankfully there are still a few backbenchers. They're sort of ploughing their own furrow sometimes as well, aren't they? Like Tom Tugendhat, who's led the committee which has essentially made Dominic Raab's position as Deputy Prime Minister untenable under any normal government, because his handling of the Afghanistan evacuation was absolutely appalling. And then some that I'm not that well aware of. There's a great piece in the Times today by Alice Thompson, who picks up on Tugendhat, but also looks for the MPs who are sort of quietly getting on with doing good things, as opposed to marching around the place sticking up for the big dog. Laura Farris is rumoured to be considering turning down a position as a ministerial aide so she can remain upon the Standards Committee, which will judge whether the Prime Minister knowingly misled Parliament. And a quick word on that, because that's the one that Chris Bryant has recused himself from after Jacob Rees-Mogg projected his own moral corruption onto Chris Bryant and said, well, you can't trust him because he's Labour, therefore he'd be biased. Rees-Mogg there, too thick to realise he's admitting that he could never be honest because of his own partisan loyalties. So Bryant shot that fox by recusing himself, and they're going to have a look at whether or not Parliament was deliberately misled.
And that's important because, of course, the only other way of doing this, of course, is when you would have, in terms of, you've got the Privileges Committee, Chris Bryant has done, is to have a Lord Geidt review, but the only person who could commission that Lord Geidt review as to whether the Prime Minister broke the ministerial code is the Prime Minister. Yeah. So let's put Lord Geidt to one side. We've now got that Privileges Committee report, which can start in full now because of that vote just after Easter in the House of Commons, James. But it does have a Conservative majority on it, like all committees do, because the Conservatives have a majority in Parliament, in the House of Commons. And they will be looking particularly at the detail of this report, of the police investigation, to determine whether, as a result of this report, Boris Johnson knew what was going on. And so when he came to the House of Commons and made, as he put it, assurances that he had not that the rules had not been broken, the guidance had been followed, whether he knew that, in fact, actually that not to be true. And if that committee can prove that they didn't know, that he knew what he was telling the House of Commons was not true, then that would be a breach of the ministerial code. Now, the Prime Minister has not said at any point until now whether in actual fact he would resign if he were found to have broken the ministerial code. There have been members of his cabinet who have said, and I think I'm quite correct in saying, and I might be wrong, but I'm correct in saying Dominic Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister, has said that he would expect a minister who is found to have broken the ministerial code to resign. But it is also just worth pointing out, and it is dancing on the head of a pin, but it will come down to this particular detail about whether he worded his statements in a particular way as so not to break the ministerial code.
Which he, of course, has spent his life choosing his words extremely carefully so as not to be held accountable.
I'm thinking of the Catherine West question.
Yes, of course.
Can you tell the House whether...
OK, and now we go live to the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will make a statement. I'm grateful to Sue Gray for her report today, and I want to thank her for the work that she's done. I also thank the Metropolitan Police for completing their investigation, and I want to begin today by renewing my apology to the House, to the whole country, for the short lunchtime gathering on the 19th of June 2020 in the Cabinet Room, during which I stood at my place at the cabinet table and for which I received a fixed penalty notice. And I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, above all, that I take full responsibility for everything that took place on my watch. Sue Gray's report has emphasised that it is up to the political leadership in Number 10 to take ultimate responsibility, and of course I do. But since these investigations have now come to an end, this is my first opportunity to set out some of the context and to explain both my understanding of what happened and also to explain what I have previously said to this House. And it's important to set out that over a period of about 600 days, gatherings on a total of 8 dates have been found to be in breach of the regulations in a building that is 5,300 metres square across 5 floors, excluding the flats. Mr. Speaker, I do think it is important because this is the first time I've had a chance I've had to set out the context. Hundreds of staff are entitled to work, and in the Cabinet Office, which has thousands of officials and now is the biggest it's been in any point in its 100-year history. And that is in itself one of the reasons why the government is now looking for change and reform. Mr. Speaker, those staff working in Downing Street were permitted to continue attending their office for the purpose of work, and the exemption under the regulations applied to their work because of the nature of their jobs reporting directly to the Prime Minister. These people were working extremely long hours, doing their best to give this country the ability to fight the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that this is no mitigation, but it is important to set out
Prime Minister,
context.
please, just one second. Can I just appeal to the House? I expect it to be heard, and I want everybody to hear it. And I want the same respect to be shown to the Leader of the Opposition afterwards. So please, this is a very, very important statement that the country wants to hear as well. Prime Minister.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to set out the context, not to mitigate or to absolve myself in any way. The exemption under which they were present in Downing Street includes those circumstances where officials and advisers were leaving the government. And it was appropriate to recognise them, to thank them for the work that they've done. Let me come to that, Mr. Speaker. I briefly attended such gatherings to thank them for their service, which I believe is one of the essential duties of leadership, and particularly important when people need to feel that their contributions have been appreciated and to keep morale as high as possible. I'm trying to explain the reasons I was there, Mr. Speaker. And it's clear from what Sue Gray has had to say that some of these gatherings then went on far longer than was necessary. And they were clearly in breach of the rules, and they fell foul of the rules. I have to tell the House, because the House will need to know this, and again, this is not to mitigate or to extenuate, I had no knowledge of those subsequent proceedings because I simply wasn't there. And I have been as surprised and disappointed as anyone else in this House as the revelations have unfolded. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, I have been appalled by some of the behaviour, particularly in the treatment of the security and the cleaning staff. And I would like to apologise to those members of staff. And I expect anyone who behaved in that way to apologise to them as well. And I'm happy to set on the record now that when I came to this House and said in all sincerity that the rules and guidance have been followed at all times, it was what I believed to be true. It was certainly the case when I was present at gatherings to wish staff farewell, and the House will note that my attendance at these moments, brief as it was, has not been found to be outside the rules. But clearly this was not the case for some of those gatherings after I had left, and at other gatherings when I was not even in the building. So I would like to correct the record, to take this opportunity, not in any sense to absolve myself of responsibility, which I take and have always taken, but simply to explain why I spoke as I did in this House. Mr. Speaker, in response to her interim report, Sue Gray acknowledges that very significant changes have already been enacted. She writes, and I quote, "I am pleased that progress is being made in addressing the issues I raised." And she adds, "Since my update, there have been changes to the organisation and management of Downing Street in the Cabinet Office with the aim of creating clearer lines of leadership and accountability, and now these need the chance and time to bed in. Number 10 now has its own permanent secretary charged with applying the highest standards of governance. There are now easier ways for staff to voice any worries, and Sue Gray welcomes that, and I quote, "Steps have since been taken to introduce more easily accessible means by which to raise concerns electronically, in person or online, including directly with the permanent secretary." The entire senior management has changed. There is a new chief of staff, an elected member of this House, who also commands the status of a cabinet minister. There is a new director of communications, a new principal private secretary, and another of other key appointments in my office. I am confident with the changes and new structures that are now in place that we are humbled by the experience and we have learned our lesson. And I want to conclude by saying that Mr. Speaker, I am humbled and I have learned a lesson, Mr. Speaker. And I want to conclude by saying that whatever the failings we'll come to that. And whatever the failings of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office throughout this very difficult period, for which I take full responsibility, I continue to believe that the civil servants and advisers in question, hundreds of them, thousands of them, some of whom, Mr. Speaker, are the very people who've received fines, are good, hard-working people, motivated by the highest calling to do the very best for our country. And I will always be proud of what they achieved, including procuring essential life-saving PPE, creating the biggest testing programme in Europe, and helping to enable the development and distribution of the vaccine which got this country through the worst pandemic of a century. And now, Mr. Speaker, we must get our country through the aftershocks of COVID with every ounce of ingenuity and compassion and hard work. So I hope that today, as well as learning the lessons from Sue Gray's report, which I'm glad I commissioned, and again, I repeat I'm grateful to her. And I hope very much that now that she has reported, we will be able to move on and focus on the priorities of the British people, standing firm against Russian aggression, easing the hardship caused by the rising costs that people are facing, fulfilling our pledges to generate a high-wage, high-skill, high-employment economy that will unite and level up across the whole of our United Kingdom. That is my mission, that is our mission, that is the mission of the whole of the government, and we will work day and night to deliver it, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The door of Number 10 Downing Street is one of the great symbols of our democracy. Those who live behind it exercise great power, but they do so knowing their stay is temporary. Long after they've gone, that door and the democracy it represents will remain firm and unyielding. But Britain's constitution is fragile. It relies on members of this House and the custodians of Number 10 behaving responsibly, honestly, and in the interests of the British people. When our leaders fall short of these standards, this House has to act. For months, members opposite have asked the country to wait. First for the police investigation, which concluded that this Prime Minister is the first in our country's history to have broken the law in office. Then they asked the country to wait for the Sue Gray report. They need wait no longer. That report lays bare the rot that under this Prime Minister has spread in Number 10. And it provides definitive proof of how those within the building treated the sacrifices of the British people with utter contempt. When the dust settles and the anger subsides, this report will stand as a monument to the hubris and the arrogance of a government that believed it was one rule for them and another rule for everyone else. The details are stark. 5 months ago, the Prime Minister told this House all guidance was completely followed in Number 10. Yet we now know he attended events on the 17th of December. At least one of those attending has received a fine for it, deeming it illegal. We know that on the 18th of December an event was held in which staff drank excessively, which others in the building described as a party, and that cleaners were left to mop up the red wine the next day. On the 20th of May, as a COVID press conference was taking place, one of his senior officials was told, "Be mindful, cameras are leaving, don't walk about waving bottles." It is now impossible to defend the Prime Minister's words to this House. This is about trust. Because during that May 20 press conference, the British public were told normal life as we know it is a long way off. But that wasn't the case in Number 10. Even now, after 126 fines, they think it's everyone else's fault but theirs. They expect others to take the blame whilst they cling on. They pretend that the Prime Minister has somehow been exonerated, as if the fact that he only broke the law once is worthy of praise. The truth is, they set the bar for his conduct lower than a snake's belly. And now they expect the rest of us to congratulate him as he stumbles over it. Number 10 symbolises the principles of public life in this country: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, leadership. But who could read this report and honestly believe the Prime Minister has upheld those standards? The reason the British public have had to endure this farce was his refusal to admit the truth or do the decent thing when he was found to have broken the law. This report was necessary because of what Sue Gray describes as failures of leadership and judgment for which senior political leadership must bear responsibility. It is that failure of leadership that has now left his government paralysed in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The government has turned the focus of his government to saving his own skin. It's utterly shameful. It is precisely because he cannot lead that it falls to others to do so. I've been clear what leadership looks like. I haven't broken any rules, and any attempt to compel...
Sorry. Can I just calm it down? Quite rightly, I wanted to the Prime Minister. I expect the same of the Leader of the Opposition. Now, those who don't wish to hear, please, go and have a cup of tea or something. Kiss Stammer.
I've been clear what leadership looks like. I haven't broken any rules, and any attempt to compare a perfectly legal takeaway while working to this catalogue of criminality looks even more ridiculous today. But, Mr. Speaker, if the police decide otherwise, I will do the decent thing and step down. The public need to know that not all politicians are the same. That not all politicians put themselves above their country. that honesty, integrity and accountability matter. Members on the opposite benches now also need to show leadership. This Prime Minister is steering the country in the wrong direction. They can hide in the back seat, eyes covered, praying for a miracle, or they can act. Stop this out of touch, out of control Prime Minister from driving Britain towards disaster. We waited for the Sue Gray report. The country can't wait any longer. The values symbolised by the door of number 10 must be restored. Members opposite must finally do their bit. They must tell the current inhabitant, their leader, that this has gone on too long. The game is up. You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. And it's time to pack his bags. Only then can the government function again. Only then can the rot be carved out. Only then can we restore the dignity of that great office and the democracy that it represents.
Prime Minister.
You're listening to LBC. I'm Sheila Fogarty. The Prime Minister responding to the Sue Gray report and to Keir Starmer's response to it as well. Stay with us throughout the afternoon. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now. We'll go back to the House of Commons now.